Hi there, welcome to Flaming Store Podfics. Today we are continuing Axiom of Choice by Literally Mad Lad. This is chapter 7, in which Deku has 10 wet dreams in one night, and we all know why. The author has a note at the beginning of this chapter that I think warrants including here. It says, this chapter wasn't in the original document, and everything was left up to interpretation. So if you want to maintain an air of mystery, I suppose you could skip this chapter. So do with that what you will. Izuku could think of nothing but Katsuki throughout his stint in Peru. The moment he laid eyes on the creature they had in captivity, Izuku's thoughts were back on the mermaid, waiting for him back in Alaska. It was unfortunate that he'd be returning to freezing temperatures. Katsuki's cave would no doubt be frozen over, and Katsuki himself would be in hibernation. It would be months before they'd see each other, potentially, but that was the price of getting more information. Better information. Something Izuku desperately needed. He thought about Katsuki's blackened tail and for the 6th time that week refrained from calling Momo. She wouldn't appreciate hearing from him, or hearing that Izuku wanted to make Katsuki her responsibility again. She must hate me, Izuku thought, in a familiar pattern of woeful guilt. This particular specimen was notably feminine on her upper half. She wore a scowl at all times, blonde hair frayed in spikes in the water, and despite recent captivity seemed to be eager to talk. Or rather, cuss them all out. Izuku made the mistake of teaching her the word fuck you in exasperation, or rather, he used it as a bribe to get her to pick up more words, but it was all she used. The back of her 4 fingers swept out from under her chin towards every person who came into the room. Izuku smiled apologetically at his fellow workers, who gave him a bland look. They all knew what that meant now. Izuku found himself studying her, not in the same way he studied Katsuki, but for curiosity's sake. He tried to identify the telltale sign of a reproductive organ against the vestigial fin. He couldn't see one, but then again, he hadn't noticed a visible one on Katsuki until it had swollen with desire. Izuku shivered. He tucked his hands between his knees and tapped his feet in an attempt to calm himself down. He couldn't. At every turn, he was thinking about what he had done with Katsuki. No one here could ever hope to do what Izuku did. Izuku had made such incredible progress with Katsuki, and Katsuki trusted him. Him. It was a feat he wanted to boast about, but couldn't. Not unless he wanted to out himself as the thief who stole Katsuki away from the research center in Alaska. Izuku waited for a casual opportunity to inquire about it, and also inquire about the creature's tails turning black. He couldn't help but see Katsuki's blackened tail the same way a toe might turn black in freezing temperatures, or finger, an entire appendage. What if Kachan's tail falls off while I'm gone, he thought, mortified at the image of Katsuki's limp torso, bloated and encased on ice on the surface of the pool. Even if Katsuki survived losing his tail, hunting would prove challenging. He'd starve within days. Maybe I should call Momo after this, he thought. A current mermaid on hand, though, was watching him sign. Does your tail ever turn black? She repeated the color black to him. He held up the laptop in his hand, black, and a pen, followed by a point to one of his co-workers' shirts. She folded her hands together, but he didn't miss the way her brow furrowed even further, like she was annoyed. It took several tries for her to finish the answer. Only bad people, she said. Izuku frowned. Bad people? He repeated. Mean people? She tapped her middle finger and index finger to her thumb. No. Bad people. He decided to investigate what this meant. Clearly, she was talking about her species and not humans, and human society might have a far different understanding as to what bad entailed. He described what rudeness meant, but she replied with yet another firm no. He described what ignorance was, but that wasn't it either. He described people hurting one another, and this served somewhat useful. She was hesitant to deny this definition, but it didn't suit her right. She replaced hurt with wronged by a friend. Traitor? Izuku offered, and described what it meant. She nodded her fist. Yes. What have you learned? Someone asked him. He had grown an audience. It was the most the creature had spoken in one sitting. Izuku turned, hand cupped to his chin. She says that traitors to her species have their tails turned black, he explained. What brought this up? I was teaching her colors, and the topic came up when we learned black, he lied, and listened intently to the observations they had made regarding black tails. It was precisely the conversation he had been waiting for. They were talking about a previous subject whose tail had gone black early on in captivity, before they could even hope to communicate with it. Evidently, something had contaminated the water. Within a week, the entire torso was encased in a silky cocoon. We lost all vitals shortly thereafter, they explained. Izuku listened in horror. There's a pocket where they can sample, or rather, taste test data, one of them explained. Like how snake tongues let them scent better and taste the air. Sometimes they pick up unwanted data, and our theory is that it caused a chain reaction that shut down the entire organism as a whole. But the cocoon theory was also interesting, one of them commented. One of our superiors thought it might transform, take DNA from the sample and adopt it, evolve in real time. So if they sample the wrong DNA, the evolution can fail? Izuku asked, and they all nodded. I mean, that's one of the theories. Once we have more subjects, we'll be conducting more research on it. It's too risky at the moment, so best not to contaminate the water, they said, and the others agreed. Izuku went back to his hotel that night in shock. Though Katsuki's tail had turned black before Izuku's last night there, he had survived far longer than a week with it. But he also knew how precisely what pocket the scientists were talking about, and he knew exactly what DNA Katsuki had been contaminated with. Human DNA, Izuku's sperm to be exact. But surely Kachan would know best. He wouldn't have sampled my DNA if he knew he couldn't, Izuku started. But it was inherently flawed. Katsuki didn't know best. Most of the time, Katsuki knew just as much as Izuku did about his species, and he had hoped Katsuki would inform him of something as critical as a chrysalis stage in his development. All Izuku knew now was that he desperately needed to return home before the ice was due to settle. Izuku sat on the edge of the tub, his skin sticky from the heat. Water bubbled out of the faucet at his back, filling the tub to the brim. His chest ached to think of Katsuki alone in the cave. Despite this, the tension in his relationship with Momo left him paralyzed with embarrassment. He couldn't ask her to do anything more for him, not without risking her trustworthiness. He knew inherently that if he pushed her too hard, she would make an effort to separate him from Katsuki. She might out Katsuki's existence, or worse. Izuku shed his shirt over his head. He peeled it off his arms as he sighed. His shorts and undergarments soon followed its descent to the tiles before he stepped into the lukewarm tub to cool off. He sunk in. The water felt like nothing at all, unlike the crisp clarity in Katsuki's cave. He missed the bite of Katsuki's water, the way his toes would go numb and shake life through his freezing limbs. As he ran his hands along the smooth, glossy bottom of the tub, he imagined that there was a film over it, silky, viscous, a coating that could only be found on Katsuki's skin as they tumbled together through the water. When he bit his lip, he could taste the scab Katsuki's raw teeth had left behind. He pierced through it to lave his tongue through the slit and taste the tinny flavor on his tongue, like when he kissed Katsuki. Izuku pushed his hand over his face. Momo would be so disappointed with him if she knew any of this, if she knew how thoroughly, inexplicably in love he was with Katsuki. Katsuki, who was allegedly a traitor to his own species. Izuku could hardly wait as he hopped between the hour-long intervals at the airports back to Alaska. He ran from each gate and paced between empty aisles. Incessantly he checked the weather, the news. Nothing had come up surrounding his property, but that didn't mean it wasn't under investigation. His biggest fears, to return and find the place swathed in caution tape, were always overshadowed by the premature glee of seeing Katsuki again. He couldn't be sure he wouldn't dive straight into the water. He'd go numb in seconds, surely, but it would all be worth it to witness Kotsky darting out of the nearest tunnel, to tackle him and smother him to death. Snow had gathered in a thick sheet on the trail to the cave. It crunched under the tires of Izuku's truck as he flew through the flurries. The instant the mound surrounding the cave came into view, Izuku was slamming out of the driver's side, car parked and still running. He skidded over deep pockets of snow. His knees nearly gave out halfway there, but he scrambled through, fingers turning red in the packed snow. Laughter bubbled out of his chest before he could help it as he shouted, "Kachan! Kachan, I'm home!" Oh God, I hope he isn't already hibernating now, he thought. Scrambling with his keys, he swept his forearm over the door, shedding it of the fresh snow, and used his foot to kick away the snow that had gathered at the base of the door. The moment the lock cranked open, Izuku was bursting through. His shoes stomped and echoed down from the stairs and into the pitch-black cavern. The gap in the ceiling was still covered, thank goodness, and a bit of thermal heat had kept the cave at a neutral temperature in comparison to the brisk atmosphere outside. Izuku shut the door and used the flashlight on his phone to hunt down the battery-powered lights he and Momo used to use. He unearthed them from a box hidden in a crevice in the rocks and snapped them to life. He set them along the edge of the pool, and a warm halo began to fill the place. Izuku's breath clouded in front of him, nose pink. His heart was racing. He could hear it thrumming in his ears as light began to fill the pool, and he could properly search for Kotsky. Sheets of frost had yet to gather on the surface, thanks to the salt. "Kachan?" Izuku said again, leaning down against the wooden platform. He dragged his fingers through the water, the splash rippling across the surface. It disturbed the pristine image of the bottom of the pool, where Izuku identified objects at the bottom of it. He recognized the neon orange frisbee he used to toss around for Kotsky. He did not recognize, though, the black mass at the bottom of the pool. A shudder shook through Izuku's core. He had the entire surface of this atrium memorized. He would have remembered a rock that size, especially where it spanned the length of the pool and underneath the dock. No, he thought, hands lurching up from the water. He checked his palms, like there would be blood there. His fingers had gone red in the cold. He scrambled for the box. He took out a flashlight, a proper one, and raised it to the water. For a moment, though, his thumb hesitated on the switch. His eyes squeezed shut, and he hugged the flashlight to his chest. He tried to remember the length of Kotsky's tail. He tried to think of its buoyancy and how Kotsky would be bloated if he had died. Would the bacteria in the water have allowed Kotsky to float to the surface if he had actually died? Kotsky isn't dead. He would be floating, Izuku told himself, his shuddering breath echoing back to him. He isn't dead. He'd be floating. Izuku repeated the sentiment enough times until he nodded resolutely to himself and summoned the courage to open his eyes again. He turned the flashlight onto the water. The beam of light shed across the particles in the water that gathered like dust motes toward the bottom of the pool. There, Izuku identified the mass. It was crinkly, like black trash bags, but was thinned out like torn-up jeans over ridges in the rocks. Izuku squinted at it, leaning far off of the dock to see the patch closest to him. After minutes of hesitation, Izuku shed his coat and sweatshirt. He reached a hand into the water. His arm disappeared, elbow deep into the water, and then up to his bicep until his cotton t-shirt hem absorbed a ring of water around it. His fingers sunk into the mass. He grabbed it and pulled it up. There was a resistance where the substance was caught on the rocks, but it tore free and followed Izuku's hand up to the dock. He gathered it between his arms. He'd recognized these scales anywhere, and now they were deflated and goopy in his arms. Kotsky's tail seemed to melt against his skin, sinking, until it webbed around his palms and wrists on its way toward the ground. The air in Izuku's lungs escaped him and refused to return. "Kachan?" Izuku started, lips trembling. He sniffed, setting the remnants of the scales aside to search for Kotsky's pale skin among the remains. He circled the pool, scanning the flashlight diligently from one end to the other to no avail. Katsuki's face, arms, torso weren't among the remains, which left Izuku stumped. He supposed there was a slim, incredibly slim chance that a predator could have entered the cave. The roof was covered, as was the river entrance he and Momo initially funneled Katsuki through. If there was a way in anywhere else in the cave system, then Katsuki surely would have flagged it as a way out. So this was also debunked. Besides, what predator would leave the tail behind? But not only that, but only the scales? Would it have been even possible to gut Katsuki's tail and keep it as intact as Izuku found it? Unless Katsuki shed it like a snake, he thought, which he could support with the cocoon theory. This seemed to be the most likely culprit, but it certainly didn't explain where this new and evolved Katsuki went. Could he have grown a new and better tail? Perhaps outgrown it? There was a chance that with Katsuki's increased diet for hibernation that he might go through a growth spurt, but Izuku didn't find this likely. At least not enough of a growth spurt to warrant shedding his entire tail. Izuku decided to investigate. He abandoned the scales in favor of running to the truck to fetch his swim gear. He shut the engine off to save gas and returned, panting, to the cave. His breath frosted in the air as he shed his clothes and equipped his insulated wetsuit. Izuku equipped the oxygen tank. He clipped it around his front. His nerves had gone stale somewhere between acknowledging Katsuki's evolution and the undying hope that this meant Katsuki was still alive. He has to be in here, Izuku reassured himself as his fins sunk into the water. The rest of his body followed shortly after until he disappeared into the blackened depths of Katsuki's cave. Distantly, the beam from his headlamp glowed in the tunnels, catching on the trail of bubbles his oxygen mask left behind. And that is it for Chapter 7 of Axiom of Choice. If you are enjoying the story, please go to AO3 and give the author some love. You can find the link to the story in the description. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future chapters. Thanks for listening.